Welcome to the National Sprint Car Hall of Fame and Museum. My name is Bob Baker, and I'm the Executive Director here at the National Sprint Car Hall of Fame and Museum. I started here back in 2008, so I've been here a little over 12 years, and I've been very fortunate with the people I work with and the great staff, volunteers, and National Sprint Car Hall of Fame inductees that we have here, who've all helped us make this place what it is. This is the only museum in the world that's solely dedicated to sprint car racing, so we're very fortunate that so many people help us with the museum. Most of the cars in our museum are rotated on every 30 to 60 days. There's different cars that come in and go out of the museum, so you can come in 2 or 3 times a year and see different cars, different exhibits, different displays, pictures, trophies, drivers' uniforms, and things in the museum that are rotated in and out. So it's a constantly changing museum, and that helps us keep it interesting for the people that visit us from across the country and also across the world. We're located right next to Knoxville Raceway, the world's most famous dirt track here in Knoxville, Iowa. So on top of our museum, there's suites that overlook the racetrack where people can watch the races. So it really is a special event center as well as a museum, and of course our museum store where we ship presents, sprint car merchandise and memorabilia to race fans all across the country. The museum was actually founded in 1987. It took until 1991 for the museum to actually open to the public. The thing that most people don't know about our museum is that we are open 7 days a week, year-round. We're only closed 4 days. We're closed Christmas, Easter, Thanksgiving, and New Year's days are the only 4 days we're closed. So we're open Saturdays and Sundays. And the reason that we're open 7 days a week is because a lot of people from across the country, the National Sprint Car Hall of Fame and Museum is on their bucket list. And so as they're driving across Interstate 80 on vacation or north and south on I-35, they'll drop off the interstate, come here to Knoxville, and spend a half a day at the museum, going through the museum, or up on our second floor. We have a nice 42-seat theater with over 800 open wheel and sprint car films that we try to rotate on a daily and weekly basis. So we're trying to show different movies for people that can come in and watch a different film if they come by a couple of times a week or on their way to their vacation and on the way home, so they can see a different film and different cars inside the museum.
Right now we're concentrating on the Knoxville Nationals right here in Knoxville, Iowa, because we're waiting for the 60th running of the event. So we thought it would be good to have some of the Nationals winners, and currently we have 11 of the Knoxville Nationals winners here. We see 3 of them here. This white number 11 that we see was Dick Gaines' winner in 1974. Now, this was Carl Kinzer's first win, and Carl Kinzer is the all-time leading owner winner at the Knoxville Nationals and in sprint car racing for that matter. Carl actually built this car himself, and Dick Gaines won in 1974 in the closest finish ever at the Knoxville Nationals when he edged out Jan Opperman.
Knoxville Nationals!
This coming summer in 2021 will be the 60th annual Knoxville Nationals, which the Nationals were started back in 1961. The reason the race was started as the super modified Nationals back in '61 is because the track was going through financial difficulties, and they were trying to come up with an idea to raise money to keep the track in operation. The racetrack promoter at the time, Marion Robinson, had the idea to put on an event that paid a lot of money. Back in the time, it paid $1,000 to win, which in 1961 was a lot of money. The total purse was $5,000, and everybody on the fair board thought that Marion Robinson, the promoter, was crazy for offering so much money, $1,000, to win a sprint car race.
Green flag underway. Jack Hodnett way off the pace at the back of the field in the 59.
So we fast forward 60 years later. Here we're coming up in 2021 with the 60th running of the Knoxville Nationals, and the race will pay $150,000 to win, not $1,000. The total purse will be almost $1 million for all 4 nights of racing. And on top of that, if somebody can lead all 50 laps of the 50-lap National Championship feature race on Saturday night, there's a $1,000 bonus per lap. So that's an extra $50,000. It's possible somebody could walk out of Knoxville next year with over $200,000 for winning the Knoxville Nationals, which is unprecedented in sprint car racing. So we're really looking forward to the 60th running of the Knoxville Nationals. That'll be the second week of August, August the 11th through the 14th here in Knoxville.
The next car we see down here is Steve Kinser's first Nationals winner, and that car has quite a story as well. Steve Kinser has won 12 Nationals, more than any other driver, and Steve had crashed on his qualifying night in Carl's number 11, and what happened was they didn't have another car. Well, enter Bob Trossel from Des Moines, Iowa. He had an extra car entered, and this would be Bob's car, number 20. And Bob, a renowned owner over the years, they dropped Carl's engine in the car, and Steve ended up winning on Sunday afternoon of the 1980 Knoxville Nationals. Now, why was it run on Sunday afternoon? Because Saturday night was fogged out. And an Iowa driver has never won the Knoxville Nationals to this day. Well, the locals thought they might get a local driver to win that night, as Knoxville, Iowa's Mike Brooks was on the pole. So Mike was on the pole with a perfect score, and Harold Annette's sprinter, of course Harold Annette of TMC Trucking in the Des Moines area, and they were on the pole. And what happened was that race got fogged out Saturday night, and on Sunday afternoon Mike ended up blowing his tire and kind of went backwards at that point, and Steve Kinser won his first Nationals in car number 20.
I think our 4 busiest days are definitely the 4 days of the Knoxville Nationals. We do a majority of our business for the season those 4 days. I mean, there's 20 to 25,000 people in Knoxville. We have a lot of activities going on every day inside our museum during the Knoxville Nationals. We have driver autograph sessions almost every hour from mid-morning until the races start at night. We have fanfare forums on our second floor, a variety of movies and films, and people speaking up on our second floor for the forums and different events we have. In addition, you just never know who you're going to see walking through our museum during the Knoxville Nationals. It could be a NASCAR driver, it could be Kenny Schrader, a past Knoxville National winner, or even the drivers that are competing that Saturday night in the Knoxville Nationals will be walking through the museum with their family.
Doug Wolfgang won the Knoxville Nationals in 1989. It remains one of the most dominant seasons by any driver in sprint car history, as Doug led not only the World of Outlaws in wins, which is the primary sprint car series, but he also led the USA series in wins. And there was kind of a split between 2 organizations that year, and Doug was a leading winner in each of those series. He didn't really care where he ran, and he won close to 50 races in this 8D. Really a dominating season, and obviously he also won the Knoxville Nationals that year.
I started coming to Knoxville when I was a teenager with my brother just to watch the races and have fun. And so for me at the museum, the most fun thing I think is watching other people come into the museum with their families, their kids, and just enjoying the cars and telling the stories about each car, how they watched it race, or who they knew that drove the car or owned the car or worked on the car, and the stories about a certain race here at Knoxville or another race in the Midwest or across the country, and how they got familiar with that race car or that driver. I think the stories behind the race cars and our Hall of Fame inductees are probably the most fun thing for me, is to watch people sharing the stories with other people in the museum and with their families.
This is the John B. Gerber garage. It's actually a salute to John B. Gerber's garage in Davenport, Iowa in 1932. And John Gerber was a famous car owner and driver. He's in the National Sprint Car Hall of Fame as a driver and also as a builder and as an owner. John was one of the original outlaws, I guess you could call him, as he didn't follow any series or anything like that. He just raced when and where he wanted back in the late 20s and through the 30s. When he had a son, Jim, his wife made him stop racing, and he became an owner and actually owned the car that won the first race at Williams Grove Speedway out in Mechanicsburg, Pennsylvania. So a lot of people ask where the first car came from that won at Williams Grove, which is a famous track out east, and it actually came from Iowa. A lot of times when John went out on the road, they would do promotions and they'd call him the pig farmer. Even though he's from the middle of Davenport, Iowa, he wasn't really a farmer at all, but it was a promotion. So they'd put a pig in his pit area, they'd give him bib overalls and a straw hat, and it'd kind of be the farm guy against the city slickers out east. And a lot of times, obviously, he would be the winner. So it's kind of a lot like pro wrestling was back in the day. The garage itself has a lot of fabricated materials that John would have made himself. And he made almost 90% of everything on his car was made by John in his garage. So this is a duplicate of that garage, and a lot of the items you see in here, as I said, are his. We have some gaskets here on the west wall up here, and those are copper gaskets, and those were actually carved out of John's copper bathtub. His wife came home one day and found him carving those, and he wasn't in the best favor with her, but a lot of neat things to see here in the John B. Gerber garage.
That's part of the history of the sport, I think, is also the economics of the sport, because back in the day, back in the, say, the 50s and 60s, you could have a race car and it would last for 2 or 3 years or even longer and keep racing over and over every weekend for a couple of years. It's not that way with modern day technology and sprint cars. The cars of today are purpose-built race cars, and the engines in the cars alone are upwards of $60,000 engines for a 410 cubic inch engine. That's just for the engine of the car. That doesn't include the tires or wheels or body or wings or any of the other parts. That's just for the engine. And a typical 410 engine will get anywhere from 7 to 9 nights of racing on it before it needs to be sent back to the engine builder to be freshened up. Sprint cars are very unique. They're what they call a direct drive car. There's the engine, a drive shaft, and then the rear end on the car. Also, something that's unique about the sprint cars, and traditionally so, is that the cars do not carry starters, batteries, generators, transmissions. The cars are started with a push truck. So the push truck pulls right behind the race car, pushes the sprint car off. The car engages and starts up, and once you're in gear, you're off to the races. There's no shifting. There is a brake in the car, and you'll notice on the older cars, the big cars in the museum and some of the early sprint cars, the brake was a brake handle that was on the outside of the car. The modern day sprint cars have the pedals inside, just like on your passenger car. They'll have an accelerator pedal and a brake pedal to use inside the car. And in addition to driving the car and working the pedals, as the drivers say, there's also a wing slider, an adjustment where the drivers can maneuver the wing back and forth on sliders. And that's on a hydraulic slider. So during the race, the drivers will be driving the race car racing, and then they'll also be adjusting that wing to maximize the downforce on the car's body, chassis, and tires to get the best traction possible.
This is the 1969 Knoxville Nationals winner, and I like to call it the last straw car a little bit. Now at Knoxville Raceway, before it was the sprint car capital of the world, it was the super modified capital of the world. And the super modifieds would have raced with cages like this one. This was technically a super modified at the time, and you can see that the cage is bolted on the car. Now, the reason I call it the last straw car is Kenny Greitz, who won the Nationals in 1969, raced it as a super modified. 2 weeks later, in a race in his hometown of Lincoln, Nebraska, it was a sprint car race, and sprint cars did not have the roll cages. So he took the roll cage off, and he ended up dying in a race without the roll cage on. So in 1970, this was one of the accidents that really propelled the sprint cars across the country to mandate roll cages. So that's kind of why I call this the last straw car, because it's one of the last cars and deaths we saw with a sprint car without the roll cage on. You know, in the early 1900s, you'd get 2-3 deaths a week in sprint cars or big cars as they were called back then. And it was not a big deal really, because the headlines would be so-and-so won, so-and-so set quick time, and so-and-so passed away. So people went to the races for a lot different reason back then, and they knew it was dangerous, and they knew that they might not return from a race. So the safety things over the years really have impacted racing in a very good way.
As the cars transitioned from big cars to super modified stock cars to super modifieds to sprint cars, the cars were raced without the wings. And the wings were introduced back in the 60s. As a matter of fact, the first Knoxville Nationals here in 1961 was won by Roy Robbins, and he brought a wing on top of his open-wheeled sprint car to race here at that race. And the people in the Midwest hadn't seen the wings before, and they were kind of laughing at him until he got on the racetrack and he set fast time. And then he went ahead and won the Knoxville Nationals in 1961 with the wing on top of the car, which the wing is an inverted airplane wing. It catches the air, pushes the car down. On an airplane wing, the wing catches the air and lifts the airplane up into the air. But if you turn that wing over, invert it, it catches the wind and aerodynamically pushes the car into the ground to give the tires better traction. Also, the safety feature or advantage with the wing is if the car does turn over, it acts as a cushion to slow the car down before the car's roll cage actually hits onto the ground. So it's a safety measure and also helps stabilize the car through the turns and create greater downforce to make the car go faster and give it better traction. So the wings were actually introduced back in Knoxville in the early 70s as a safety feature because some of the accidents were getting pretty violent without the wings, and the wings were brought in not so much as to speed up the cars, but for the safety of the cars. And the wings have been a staple here in Knoxville since the early 1970s, and that's what races here every week. However, there are still lots of non-wing sprint car racing in the United States. The premier group for non-wing racing is the United States Auto Club, and they will be here on July the 10th for the Corn Belt Nationals. It's the big non-wing race, the non-wing nationals here in Knoxville. So non-wing sprint car racing is still very popular. It's just that the wing racing is more popular right now in the United States. When the cars are loaned to us by the people who own them and restore them, they're brought to a building right across from our parking lot, and that's our staging building. And they sit in the staging building until we have a specific display area for the car in the museum. And then during the time period it's on display, we promote it, let people know that the car or exhibit, like our Salute to Champion Greg Hodnett with 6 of Greg Hodnett's cars, will be in the museum. And then when the display is over, when the exhibit ends, the car or cars go back to the staging building until the owners can pick them up and take them home. So the staging building really is a place where the cars are staged before they come into the museum. And it's also a place where the cars go and are stored until the owners can pick them up. So it really helps our museum rotate the displays and exhibits inside the museum for people to come in and enjoy. So if you're here at the races at Knoxville or for the Nationals, or you're visiting or crossing the country, you're always going to see different cars, different exhibits, different trophies, drivers' uniforms, videos, just a whole assortment of cars, different types of open-wheel cars, primarily sprint cars.
This year, our Salute to Champion Greg Hodnett continues. Usually we do a Salute to Champion every single year. Of course, with the pandemic, things have changed a little bit, and we want to make sure that people can see this because this is a great salute that we have to one of the late great drivers in sprint car racing history. This is Greg Hodnett's first car that he drove back in 1986 at a young age, and Greg was a mechanic on this car. His father made sure he was a mechanic, finally got his shot to drive it, and then ended up winning his second night out in the car. So this is the very first car that Greg drove in the Memphis area. It would be a B car. They called it B car down there. This car was restored after sitting in a garage for 30 years. So just a great car, and the car that started out Greg Hodnett's career. This is the car that he took out with the World of Outlaws in 1993 and got Rookie of the Year. So the World of Outlaws, the premier sprint car series in the country, goes all over the country. So this was Greg's inauguration with the World of Outlaws in 1993. The family owned the car, and they had help from Kelly and Associates out of the Memphis area as well. So Greg began his career in Memphis. His family was all into racing. His dad was called the Tennessee Tiger, Hoyt Hodnett, down in the Memphis area, and was a great racer in his own right. So this is the car that he took out with the World of Outlaws. And the next season, he was hired to drive our next car in line here, which is the 8TW, the Two Winners machine out of Indiana, is where Tom Wimmer was from, and hired Greg to drive this car. And this is where we saw Greg really accelerate his career with the World of Outlaws. In the 8TW, his first claim to fame really was at the Knoxville Nationals, where he had a tough qualifying night. He came back and won the Friday non-qualifiers race, which put him in the middle of the C main on Saturday night. So you have to get to the front of the C main to get into the back of the B main. You have to get in the front of that to get in the back of the A. So he ended up passing over 50 cars and finishing 5th in the A main. So he came from the middle of the C main all the way up through the B and through the A. And people were starting to really take notice of Greg. The other thing that was unique about this team was they had a 3-car team with the World of Outlaws, which was unheard of at the time. So Greg's teammates were Jeff Swindell, who's going to be inducted in the National Sprint Car Hall of Fame with Greg, and also Joe Gertie. And they had a 3-car team out with the Two Winners team. Was actually 3 winners for a year there with the World of Outlaws. So very tough to keep a 3-car team going, but they did a good job. Greg also won his first World of Outlaws event at Bayland Speedway down near Houston, Texas in this car. Halfway through the 98 season, Greg left a World of Outlaws team that was the Selma Shell 11H team, and he had a decision to make. He had an offer to race in Central Pennsylvania. Now, Central Pennsylvania has a wealth of racing history, obviously. It's really a sprint car mecca and hub for weekly racing. And Greg knew if he went off the road to make a living at racing, Pennsylvania would be a good place to do that. So he teamed up with the famous Apple Motorsports car here. As we take a look at the car, it was a famous car in Pennsylvania owned by Bob Stewart. And he picked up mechanic Lee Stauffer at that time. And the Apple Motorsports car and the team itself, over the next several seasons, won around 100 feature events in Pennsylvania and outside of Pennsylvania. They even went out against the World of Outlaws and swept races in Tupelo, Mississippi. So it wasn't a team that just stayed in Pennsylvania. They won a lot of races across the country, and Greg became very successful in that ride. Then he had an opportunity to drive for Al Hamilton, and Al Hamilton is the winningest car owner in the history of Central Pennsylvania. So Greg got into the 77 car here with Al Hamilton, and unfortunately we lost Al Hamilton just a few weeks ago. So, but they teamed up together, won 22 races in only a year and a half. So it was a really good combination, and they won a lot of races in that car. Now at this point, Greg was commuting back and forth from Memphis and ended up settling into Pennsylvania, and that's really where he settled for the rest of his career. And he picked up his biggest win ever in this car. This is the Jim and Sandy Klein number 22, and he picked up the Williams Grove National Open back in 2009, and that's the biggest race on the East Coast, is the Williams Grove National Open, and he picked that up, as well as the Tuscarora 50 at Port Royal Speedway. So a couple big races out in that area, and the team racked up around 36 wins together. As he moved on into his career here, he got into John Trone's number 39, and John was and is one of the big car owners in Central Pennsylvania. In 3 years' time, they accumulated 32 wins. So, and a lot of big wins came that way. And then as we move down to the end, we see Greg's last car. This is the Hefner number 27 ride. And Greg was with Hefner for quite a few years, and they won a number of races. In 5 years together, they won 70 races. Greg's last feature win actually came at the Knoxville Raceway on a qualifying night at the Knoxville Nationals. So this is the car that he won that race in. So we're really proud to have this group of cars here. A lot of the car owners are still the car owners of these cars. Sometimes these cars get sold and moved between people, but these cars are actually owned by the original owners here, and we're really proud to have them on display here in Knoxville at the National Sprint Car Hall of Fame Museum.